10. The case of the missing NAND gate. Late in April, after the first deadline had come and gone, Ed Rayzala was sitting in his cubicle, examining his third, revised debugging schedule. Down the hall past his open doorway came Dave Epstein, one of the best of the Hardy Boys, whose humorous look, a grin that almost envelops his eyes, can by itself provoke smiles. Epstein was carrying a wire-wrapped board. He was holding it in both hands like a tray, with the side containing all the wires facing up. The thing looked terrible, the very picture of a kludge. For out of the nest of wires on the board, 3 little strands of wire stood straight up in the air, attached to nothing, with little bits of adhesive tape wrapped like tiny flags to their loose ends. Rayzala looked up, saw Epstein and his cargo, closed his eyes, shook his head, and looked again. "Hey!" Rayzala cried. Epstein stopped. He poked his head in around the partition and, grinning, made as if to offer the terrible-looking board to Rayzala. Rayzala put his hands on his desk and buried his face in them. It was just another routine day down at debugging headquarters. In theory, it would be possible to test fully a computer like Eagle, but it would take literally forever to do so. The veterans in the Eclipse group maintained that most computers never get completely debugged. Typically, they said, a machine gets built and sent to market, and in its first year out in public, a number of small, and sometimes large, defects in its design crop up and get repaired. As the years go by, the number of bugs declines. But although no flaws in a computer's design might appear for years, defects would probably remain in it. One so small and occurring only under such peculiar circumstances that they might never show up before the machine became obsolete or simply stopped functioning because of dust in its chips. Big bugs in the logic of a machine, however, and even what might seem to be fairly small ones, have to be found and cast out in the lab. The hardware of modern computers is remarkably reliable, and needs to be. A computer like Eagle does a cycle of work in 220 billionths of a second. If it tended to fail only once every million cycles, it would be a very unreliable contraption indeed. At first, the Eclipse group worked on Eagle board by board, trying to make the machine functional in the most basic ways. This took months, and might have cost more time if Carl Alsing and Rayzala had not finally persuaded West of the need for microdiagnostic programs. Then they turned to the higher-level diagnostics, and the real fun began. According to the Eclipse group's theory of debugging a computer, you did not try to prove by exhaustive analysis that the machine was in all its details logically correct. You exercised the computer instead and fixed it when it didn't work. The higher-level diagnostics had to provide the exhaustive analysis. In other words, they were crucial. They had to exercise Eagle strenuously. They had to be nasty, unfair, and subtle, and not full of errors themselves. A long list of programs that tested 16-bit Eclipses had been worked out over the years. The first ones on the list were fairly easy tests. They got progressively harder. Eagle would have to run all of them, and when it did, they'd be able to say it was a bona fide 16-bit Eclipse. But it would also have to demonstrate that it could be a 32-bit Eagle, of course, and the diagnostics that would test Eagle's 32-bit hood didn't exist when they started debugging. This worried Rayzala. West has everything in the company moving on. The printed circuit boards are getting built. If there is a major flaw in Eagle, I want to find out about it now and minimize the impact. Rayzala wanted 32-bit diagnostics that were tough and thorough, and he wanted them right away. But the diagnostics support group was producing them very slowly. Rayzala feuded with diagnostics. Fear made him angry. He shouted and he threatened, but none of it seemed to do much good. Those diagnostics came in gradually. In the lab one day a sign appeared. Someone must have plucked it from the side of a road. It bore a picture of the national bird and the inscription, Eagle Associates Real Estate. Another small device sat on top of Coke beside the Micronova. This little thing had been designed as an aid to debugging Eagle, but no one ever got around to debugging the device itself. Remembering the assemble-it-yourself kits of electronic equipment that have been the starting points for many an engineering career, someone attached to the undebugged debugging device a label that said Heathkit. Soon these things lost their power as jokes and became part of the furniture of the lab. When they had started debugging, the wires on the backs of the boards had all been blue. They made their changes with red wires. The backs of the wire-wrapped boards got redder and redder. Slowly, painfully, Eagle was becoming an Eclipse. Once in a while someone would find a problem, fix it temporarily, and move on. The engineer would plan to come back and make a proper repair but might forget about it, and weeks later it would cause some mysterious failure. Inevitably, this happened. They lost some time that way. Through the winter, the wire-wrapped boards held up well, but come April, constant handling was beginning to make some of the many mechanical connections unreliable. Wires and the sockets in which the chips were housed began coming loose once in a while, causing flaky failures. These occurred erratically and were often hard to diagnose. As the debuggers like to say, it's hard to fix something when it's working. Here and there, a bad chip impeded their progress. Just stuff you never account for in a schedule, Rezala said. You assume it's not gonna happen, and it always does. In addition, the Eclipse Group's engineers were finding plenty of bugs in the logic of their design. We went with an imperfect design, said Rezala. We knew we were pushing it. So his schedules slipped and slipped and slipped again. The way to stay on schedule, he said, is to make another one. So far, though, West could say, as he almost always did when asked about the machine, nothing fatal yet. Rezala would say, it's common, it's common. Usually he would add, there's still a good chance that we've totally blown it. For many months, no single variety of problem fed his worry, just whatever the next diagnostic program happened to turn up. But Rezala told me early on, I believe there's always a focal point in any machine. And by May, it had identified itself as far as he was concerned. It was the part of Eagle called the instruction processor, the IP. Perhaps this was, at last, the boogeyman. West had helped to debug the first Eclipse and some of the subsequent models by using an oscilloscope to look inside the machines. An oscilloscope, said Jim Vers of the Hardy Boys, is what cavemen used to debug fire. The Hardy Boys had much better tools, computers essentially, to debug their new computer. Rezala liked to tell them, you guys don't know what fun it is to bring up a machine. In fact, however, you probably couldn't build a computer of Eagle's class without the help of several functioning computers, and especially not without the help of the logic analyzers. One crucial difference between Eagle and earlier machines involved the parts of Eagle known as accelerators. These were primarily the system cache and the IP, both of which were designed in order to eliminate the bottleneck between the machine and its storage. Think of a program as a list of assembly language instructions and data for the instructions to apply to. A computer without accelerators runs through this list in a halting manner. It must execute an instruction, then seek out in its memory or in peripheral storage devices the next instruction, bring it back, figure out what it requires, and finally execute it. It can take a lot more time to retrieve the next instruction and prepare it for execution than it does actually to execute it. So if you can arrange to have those first two operations performed at the same time, you can greatly increase the speed of your computer. That approximately was the theory behind the IP. While it is telling the computer what instruction to execute right now, the IP is, in a sense, making assumptions about what the next several instructions in a program will be. At any given time, the IP will have one instruction in execution, one instruction decoded and prepared for execution, one instruction in the process of being prepared, and one or more instructions already retrieved and about to be decoded. The IP has a fairly small storage compartment of its own, in which it keeps instructions that are likely to be required next and also instructions that have been used recently. Computer programs tend to repeat themselves or to loop. In the best case, when a program loops, the IP already has the next instructions in its storage. Therefore, it doesn't have to send out for them and time is saved. The IP is a complex device. The other main accelerator, the system cache, also makes assumptions about what the computer will be asked to do next. It contains a storage compartment considerably larger than the IPS. Like the IPS, the system cache's storage consists of expensive memory chips that operate with great speed. Among other roles, the system cache tries to keep handy commonly used instructions and data, so that if the IP doesn't have the necessary information to order up the next step in a program, it can get it quickly from the system cache. In this situation, if what's needed is in the system cache, time is saved. It would take much longer for the system cache to get the necessary information out of main memory and then pass it on to the IP. Because in main memory, the chips operate at relatively slow speed and there are a great many instructions and data to sort through. Accelerators represent one clever, well-known means of gaining speed, and they're well worth the hardware if what's needed is a fast computer. But from the point of view of debuggers, accelerators can be infernal devices. not because of the quantities, but because of the kinds of problems they create. Inconsistency between them is one of the deadly species of crocs. To visualize Eagle's memory system, imagine a funnel. At the narrow end are the IPS storage compartment and other small compartments located in other parts of the machine. The system cache is a wider storage, and the boards of main memory are widest, the funnel's mouth. Main memory holds a lot of data and instructions, including an exact copy of everything in the system cache and in the IP. Exact copy is the crucial term. The accelerators are forever throwing out blocks of information and bringing in new ones, making their assumptions according to certain fixed and clever rules. They must do a fair amount of internal housekeeping in order to make sure that they are always consistent with main memory and with each other. If, for instance, a given block of instructions is residing in both the IP and system cache, both must contain identical copies of that block. But suppose the system cache is changing the contents of its storage compartment, and at just the wrong moment some electronic event intervenes, in some unforeseen way. Suppose further that this electronic event causes one or the other of the accelerators to err in its internal housekeeping. And suppose this error causes the IP to contain a block of instructions that looks the same, but is in fact slightly different from the one that the system cache contains. When this happens, the machine is prepared to fail. There's a time bomb set inside it. The IP is going to order the rest of the machine to execute the wrong instruction sooner or later. Usually, it's later, and that's the rub. The machine will fail while running a diagnostic program. The debuggers will hook up their analyzers and get pictures of it failing, and nothing they see will account for the failure, because the real problem, the ticking bomb, was set somewhere far back in time, along the winding road of that diagnostic program. This was the worst sort of problem that they were encountering that spring. Early one morning in the middle of May, Chief Sergeant Detective of the Hardy Boys, Ken Holberger, turns his brown Saab down the road toward the red brick fortress of Westboro. It's a cloudy, hazy day. He notices, though, that muted sunlight comes in at the top of his windshield. Back when the debugging began, it was dark when he drove in and dark when he left. The slow advance of the morning sun across his windshield, when he makes the turn into the parking lot, has been one of the principal ways by which he has kept track of outside planetary time. As for other events in the world at large, wars, famines, rock concerts, he is a little out of touch. When he goes home after a day on a difficult case and sits down in his armchair and picks up the newspaper, he can't even read. He just stares at the front page. Most of the group are working too hard now. Around this time, one of the Hardy Boys tells his wife that Data General provides its employees with alimony benefits, as well as medical insurance. And the funny part is his wife believes him. "We're deep in the debug. Yeah, underground," says Holberger. "Burnout City," he says. Holberger wears a trim black beard. In his routine actions, the way he walks down a hall, the shape of his mouth when he gets ready to talk, Holberger seems to embody assertion as West does, but more smoothly than West. Holberger has the appearance of one to whom all things come easily. You have the feeling that he couldn't look messy if he tried. You'd never see a vinyl penholder in his breast pocket, and you won't find him hanging around the basement after work to play adventure or discuss machines. He says he doesn't spend any time thinking about what people do with computers. A sense of the applications is somewhat missing, but it doesn't matter, he says, and he smiles slightly. We say the ultimate goal is to build a machine to run a multi-programming reliability test. But I understand that people who buy computers do run other programs on them, like Adventure and Star Trek and things. Holberger joined the company 3 years ago, and since then has risen from the status of a recruit to a position of importance. He has chief responsibility under Rezala for the details of the hardware of this major CPU. He is the right man for the job. By general consensus, he is the only member of the group with anything like a complete understanding of the new computer's hardware. Holberger and Rezala are good friends. Rezala seems to feel something of an older brother's admiration and affection toward Holberger. "Holberger's a sharp cat," says Rezala. The faults that Rezala finds in him have nothing to do with ability, but with the fact that Holberger sometimes moves too quickly and makes careless mistakes. And there is the problem of Holberger's style in the lab, for which Rezala is willing to accept much of the responsibility. Holberger is known as one of the tough guys in the basement. In part, this is the result of long hours and strain. Halberger says that when he can hear his mind buzzing from caffeine, he tends to be his most abrupt. He also says he rarely brings frustration home. He gets it out at work, and when he's really angry, he takes it out on Rayzala because he knows that's safe. He doesn't waste time listening to people who aren't making good, relevant sense to him, just in order to be polite. If he's working on a problem with several other engineers and feels that too many are involved, he'll simply ignore what one or two of them have to say, and eventually they'll get angry and go elsewhere. In local parlance, he's a gunslinger, one who shoots from the hip. If you can't get what you need from some manager at your level in another department, go to his boss. That's the way to get things done. He learned this style from Rayzala, who learned it from West. They take the same general attitude toward their work. It doesn't matter how hard you work on something, says Halberger. What counts is finishing and having it work. Like Rayzala, Halberger worries sometimes about playing the tough guy. He says he often feels sorry after he's been abrupt with one or another of the Hardy boys, and he is consciously developing tact for the lab. Let's see, I'm a little confused here, he tends to say now, when what he means is, you guys are all wrong. Halberger is married but has no children yet. He says he has more than enough money right now. He has also received some company stock. Stock options, he notes, blur issues of salary. Data General turns people into capitalists, he says. Halberger likes the local atmosphere. The jeans, West's casual dress remind him, he says, that we're not at IBM. He likes not having to punch a time clock. But he knows that his freedom from company clocks doesn't stem from corporate altruism. They don't want us to know how many hours we work. If we did, they'd have to pay us a lot more. But, Halberger says, I don't work for money. For the last 2 years, he has been involved in projects with the flavor of crisis about them. He worked on the M/600 with Rayzala and went without a break into Eagle. He has been saying of late that he doesn't want to take on any more jobs like this one, but he's also been saying that he isn't sure he means it. It's very challenging and very interesting, he says. There's a lot of prestige, I would say. Perhaps I like some of the things I say I don't like. It's consuming, I don't know. Perhaps I don't like it, but jobs like this aren't real common. In other companies, people with our experience aren't allowed to do this, I think. He wears a wry smile. Of course, that's how Data General gets cheap labor. Halberger has noticed that there is almost no one in the basement involved in CPU design who is over 35. What happens to old CPU engineers? Halberger is 26 now, and though not exactly on his deathbed, he is curious about what a computer engineer does afterward. Maybe, he says, efforts like this one can only be conducted by the very young. Like war, I suggest. Yeah, really, he says, laughing. Halberger's father was an engineer, and so are 3 of his 4 brothers. He went to Clarkson and earned a master's degree at the University of Illinois, a Jerusalem of computer engineering. Back then, one of the few universities in the world where a student could do research in the hardware of computers. He hung around an old IBM machine in high school and was taking things apart virtually from his infancy. It's something he still does. Recently, when he bought a digital watch, he took it apart. Same thing with his new programmable calculator. I usually get things back together, too. Significant parts of Eagle are mainly of Halberger's own devising. He thrashed out the plan for the implementation of the memory management system in many long, loud sessions with Wallach. He's a good play on Wallach, says Rayzala proudly, feeling that he himself could not have held his own with Wallach, as Halberger did. Halberger designed most of the IP in Eagle. He regrets that it isn't 2 years earlier, for if it were, Eagle's hardware design might represent an advance in the state of the art, and not just an example of it. But Halberger feels that he and his colleagues have taken some original approaches. There were some general ideas out there, but the actual implementation of the IP, with all due modesty, I took some vague specs and thought it up. In fact, he made the IP run faster than those specs envisioned. As for the question of whether the IP will ever work right, he isn't worried about that. The way he looks at it, the whole machine's a crossword puzzle that he and the rest of the designers thought up, and now they just have to solve it. I'm getting quite good at it, he says. I can track a problem back into the Twilight Zone quite well. With a touch of regret, Halberger puts the spring morning behind him and makes his way briskly through the basement, still mostly empty at this hour. As expected, when he gets to the lab, he finds Jim Vers there, sitting in front of Gollum. And right away, Halberger's back into it. Last night, per Halberger's instructions, Both Coke and Gollum were left running the diagnostic program called Eclipse 21. Some weeks before, the debuggers ran this program, and the machine failed sporadically. They didn't closely examine the failure. They decided that it was probably a flaky, most likely a loose connection or noise, and they went on to other diagnostic programs. Now, however, the machines have successfully negotiated all of the basic Eclipse diagnostics except for Eclipse 21. So it's time to go back and clean up the problem, whatever it is, the failure that might be noise or a loose connection. One characteristic of the diagnostic programs is extreme repetitiousness. Each test contains a number of subtests, each one of which consists of dozens of instructions, ADDs, subtracts, jumps, loops, skips on equal, and so on. The program has the machine perform one of these subtests dozens of times, each time with different data, and then tells it to go on to the next subtest. When the last of these subtests is completed, the diagnostic program directs the machine to go back and repeat the process all over again. The entire program, including all the repetitions of the subtests, is repeated a large number of times, say, 100, before one so-called pass is complete. If during all these calisthenics the machine fails to execute an instruction properly, the program directs it to confess the act by sending an error message out to its console, and then tells it to go on with the exercise. The debuggers can come in after the machines have been running all night and find out right away, by placing an order through the console, how many passes of the program the machine has run and how many times it has failed. Vers has already done this. He tells Holberger that Gollum ran 921 passes of Eclipse 21 last night with only 30 failures, and Holberger makes a face. In this context, 921 is a vast number. It means that any given instruction in the diagnostic program may have been executed millions of times. Against 921 passes, 30 failures is a very small number. It tells them the machine is failing only once in a great while, and that's bad news, because it's hard to locate the cause of a failure that crops up only once in a while. As they say, the first step in fixing something is getting it to break. The problem could just be a loose connection or noise, though. But while noise and loose connections can cause sporadic failures, they usually do so erratically, in no discernible pattern. And when Holberger asks Vers how Coke performed running Eclipse 21, Vers tells him that the story is the same as it was with Gollum. 921 passes, 30 failures. I'm still willing to call it a noise problem, says Vers. But Vers is thinking, either that noise is remarkably consistent or we've got a real problem in the logic somewhere. Holberger thinks it would be nice if noise was the culprit. This bug in Eagle has the feel of an unpleasant one. So thinking wishfully, they concoct a few theories about noise. Finally, Holberger says, "Okay, time to fix it." They don't need to say much to each other for a long time after that. Between Holberger and Vers, there exists a kind of technical understanding that outruns the powers of speech. Most hardy boys share this specialist's ESP to some degree. It's a feeling that some good chess players say they share with worthy opponents, a kind of mind reading, what Holberger calls being in sync. To a degree, all of the hardy boys are loners. All say they usually prefer to work by themselves. But Vers and Holberger have found that working together, they do produce results. To Vers, Holberger is very quick, and because of his superior knowledge of Eagle's design, Holberger can often fill in the details for Vers. Holberger, for his part, is impressed with Vers and calls him one of the stars. Vers was given responsibility for the IP, and he designed a large part of it with Holberger's assistance. And when the debugging began, Vers quickly picked up technique and found his own style for the lab. Holberger feels that by now Vers, too, can find his way adroitly into the twilight zone of Eagle. None of the hardy boys hesitates to contradict what he considers to be a wrong technical statement, no matter who utters it. Vers can be abrupt in the lab, too. He is a tall, fairly husky young man with a stern glare. You notice this sometimes when talking to him. He's looking at you and he's really listening. It makes some people nervous. His manager's confidence in him is tempered only by their feeling that he works too hard. That is how they express it. Vers owns his own small computing system, and sometimes after a long day in the lab, he will go home and tinker with it. None of the old hands would dream of doing that, but some of the recruits are hobbyists. When the veterans in the group were growing up, computers were quite rare and expensive. But Vers went to school in the age when anyone with a little money and skill could make up a small personal system. Vers says that what he does at home is different enough from what he does at work to serve as recreation for him. At work, he deals with hardware. When he's at home, he focuses on software, reading programming manuals, and creating new software for his own computer. Vers has no real complaints about the work. On the contrary, his only gripe is that lately his managers have been scheduling the work in the lab in such a way that he can't always get his hands on Gollum for as long as he wants. He calls computers the ultimate toy. He says, "I like to tinker, I like to build things." In his senior year at Georgia Tech, he got interested in digital clocks. "I built 4 or 5, then it was computer terminals. I built one. Then I decided I ought to have a computer to hook it up to. So I got a microprocessor, and then I figured it was not worth much without an operating system. So I wrote a small operating system. I did a number of all-nighters building this computer junk." As it happened, Vers hated the first computer he dealt with. It was a big machine that many people shared, and it just spat out work. It was a cold, distant bureaucrat of a computing system, a machine to which you couldn't talk back. Soon afterward, though, he got to use a small Hewlett-Packard minicomputer. It stood alone, and one could deal with it directly. That made it friendly. Holberger and Vers hooked the probes of 2 logic analyzers to various parts of Gollum, and they set the analyzers so that they will snap their pictures when the machine fails. They call this putting on a trace. They back up the program just a little ways from the point of failure. They run it, and it doesn't fail. Another clue, it suggests that they may be facing a cache interaction problem. In a machine with accelerators, history is important. Often it's some complex combination of previous operations that leads to a failure later on. So now Holberger and Vers start the diagnostic program all the way back at its beginning and go out to the cafeteria for a cup of coffee. About 15 minutes later, when they have returned to their chairs in front of Gollum, there is a quick flash on the screens of the analyzers. The machine has failed. They have their pictures. They pull up their chairs and start studying snapshots of signals. They are trying to figure out exactly what Gollum is doing when it fails. The pictures and the printed listing of the steps in the diagnostic program give them the answer. Okay, it's doing a JSR and return. In essence, the diagnostic program is telling the machine to take a short detour off the main road of the program. Gollum is supposed to jump away from the stream of instructions it's executing and go get a new instruction. This new instruction should direct the machine to go right back to the place where it was before it took the jump. This small series of operations is a little hurdle, a trick question, a spot quiz, in the midst of a subtest of the diagnostic program. Further study also tells them that the machine did in fact jump to the right instruction, and it did return to the right place. But when it got there, it executed the wrong next instruction. This tends, as they put it, to implicate the memory system, and particularly the IP and system cache. "Is it hitting the iCache?" says Holberger. That's the next question. The IPS small storage compartment is known as the iCache, and what they want to know is whether or not the instruction that the machine is supposed to return to and execute after its jump is residing in the iCache. The IP saves instructions that it has been executing recently. So if the program has called for this instruction a short time ago, it will probably be in the iCache now, at the time of the failure. They look at more pictures and from them infer that the IP is in fact hitting its cache. And they go on, examining with the analyzers the contents of the iCache. They discover that it has the wrong instruction at the address where the right one should be. The conversation that leads them to this conclusion is characterized by alarming brevity. Even a skillful computer engineer from another project wouldn't be able to follow it. A rough translation may help. Imagine that Gollum's memory system is organized like a town in which every house has a mailbox. In the computer, there is a large number of mailboxes, each with its own unique address. Inside the main memory, there are thousands and thousands of these mailboxes. Identical copies of some of these mailboxes, labeled with the same address numbers and holding the same contents, are also in the system cache, and a smaller number of mailboxes are in the iCache. The diagnostic program has directed Gollum to jump to a particular mailbox, to a particular address. At that address, in that mailbox, is an instruction that tells Gollum to go to another mailbox at another address. The IP looks through its cache and finds that it has a mailbox with this second address. This second address is indeed the right address, but the instruction in the mailbox is the wrong one. In fact, what's there is an error message. an instruction that causes Gollum to confess failure on the system console, which sits beside Halberger and Vers. It's a postman's nightmare. Time dissolves in the lab on cases like this one. When Vers and Halberger look up from their analyzers, it is already 2 in the afternoon. In a moment, Jim Geyer comes in, puts down his motorcycle helmet, pulls up a chair, and starts asking questions. Talking about Geyer some time before, Rayzala has outdone himself in the enthusiasm of his speech, as if portraying the person he is describing. Geyer's stubborn. Oh, is he stubborn? And he has one amazing flaw. Ask him a question about any problem at all, and he will get down to the most boring, low-level detail. Rayzala took a breath and went on. Geyer's a mechanic. He likes to fix things. Halberger gets an esoteric notion of an idea and then starts implementing it. Halberger gets a thrill out of making it work, but also out of inventing it. Geyer's more of a craftsman. Geyer can build it and refine it, and he works for the pleasure of getting the last bug out of it. I identify with Geyer more probably than with anybody in the group. I don't think he thinks he's a computer genius either, but just a damn good engineer. Geyer wears a brown beard that makes his face appear to rest inside an oval frame. He is much given to laughter. He abandons himself to his laugh. It's a high-pitched, rapid one, the kind that makes the laugher close his eyes and shake his head. He often leaves his shirt unbuttoned down to the breastbone. A bachelor, he likes to go rock climbing. He was one of those whom West must have had in mind when he said that computer engineering was the sort of thing that appealed to people who liked to climb up mountains. Geyer says, I was considered wimpy in high school. He grew up in a suburb of Boston, not one of the very fancy ones, nor one of the tough ones, but a place in which athletic ability sometimes superseded other virtues. In his high school, he says, there were the athletes and the nobodies. And he was a nobody, partly because he got very good grades and partly because he had asthma. He had trouble running the mile, but he says, I used to surprise people in gym class. Geyer, too, is the son of an engineer and was a tinkerer practically from birth. I took apart clocks and all kinds of stuff, lawn mowers. I loved taking things apart. Loved putting them back together, too, just to look inside and see how it works. Hands-on, that's what I like to do. He went to MIT as an undergraduate, determined to learn something and also to have a good time, and he says he accomplished both ambitions. He got mostly A's at MIT and went to Northwestern for a year of graduate school. He had taken up with computers in high school. His school had an old IBM machine, too. He was going to study physics in college, but it bored him. He preferred engineering. He liked touching things, especially by then electronic ones. During one summer, he worked for a defense contractor in Boston. I didn't especially appreciate that, he says, but the money was good and, more important, the job gave him a chance to work on something that had never been done before, on state-of-the-art electronics. He enjoyed this aspect of it immensely. He ignored the ultimate fruits of the project. He didn't bother to get a security clearance, and so afterward he wasn't ever allowed to look at the thing he had helped to make. Geyer has been at Data General for 3 years, ever since graduate school, and he likes the pace. He doesn't care a hoot, he says, about having the president come down and shake my hand. And he doesn't think much about money, though he won't turn it down. He seems in his busyness among the happiest of the group. Amazed at his equanimity, one of his colleagues has said, the thing about Jim is you can't make him mad. And he has become a favorite of both West's and Rayzala's, mainly because of his attitude toward the debugging. He started getting into everyone else's boards, and when I saw that, bang, West has said. It's true. At the moment, Geyer appears to be much less interested in the board he helped to design, the IOC, than he is in some of the other boards, particularly the IP. Partly, that's because he knows that right now fixing the IP is more important than fixing his own board. And Geyer, who has staked several years on the Eclipse group, feels protective toward it. If we don't succeed, we can kiss the Eclipse group goodbye, he says. He also likes to work on the IP because he doesn't know how it works. To me, if I can't do it, it's more of a challenge, says Geyer. He has spent entire nights alone in the lab, studying schematics and microcode listings in an attempt to fathom the IP. Geyer takes naturally to the night shift. He keeps microcoders hours, which is to say, peculiar ones, and he has amazed even some of Alzing's midnight programmers. John Blau remembers seeing Geyer in the lab at 4:30 one morning, surrounded by several logic analyzers, all of them hooked up to Gollum. Blau was on his way home at this hour, but after a full night of work on the IP, Geyer was evidently still going strong. I would start sniffing something around 10:30 at night, Geyer says, and I just could not let go. I didn't know how to fix the problems that I saw, but I couldn't leave until I had a picture of them. Often, Geyer leaves around 3 in the morning. A few hours later, Vers comes in, and the first thing he does is to read Geyer's notes in the logbook and study the pictures Geyer has taken on the analyzers. Surprisingly often, that's all it takes. Vers knows right away what's wrong and how to fix it. Vers and Geyer make a marvelous debugging team, but only when they aren't working together. One time, Rayzala came into the lab, gestured across the room at Vers and Geyer, and smiling said, "The two Jims." They were sitting face to face in front of Gollum, having an argument about some fine technical point. Geyer was saying, "No, no, 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 no." He proceeded to describe his own theory. His hands made bowls in the air, wrapped imaginary packages, scrubbed invisible windows. Vers sat still. You could see the muscles in his jaw flexing and unflexing. When Geyer's spiel wound down, Vers began his retort in a soft voice, telling Geyer that his theory was completely preposterous. Geyer interrupted him. Vers clamped his own mouth shut. Obviously, their temperaments don't always mix. Perhaps they have too much in common. "Geyer and I are very headstrong," says Vers, "and we each want to do it our own way. We get annoyed and lose our trains of thought if it's not being done our own way." Vers also says, later on, to gales of laughter from the other Hardy boys, "Jim and I don't debug well together. He asks too many questions that I can't answer." Vers designed part of the IP, including some of the part known as the iCache, and Geyer has made this piece of hardware his #1 suspect in almost every debugging case. "There was a time," Vers will say later, "when if anything went wrong, Jim would take out the iCache. If Gollum ran out of paper, if it went up in smoke, he would take out the iCache. I didn't appreciate Jim pulling the iCache all the time." Taking out the iCache means essentially disconnecting it from the rest of the machine. If the machine fails with the iCache in place, but works when the iCache is taken out, then the problem must lie with the iCache. That's the theory, but sometimes it's false. Taking out the iCache makes Eagle very tolerant of faults in other pieces of hardware and in the microcode. "There was a time when everyone was claiming that the IP was wrong, and that put a lot of pressure on me," says Vers. "And from time to time, I did end up proving that the problem was not on the IP. But true, the IP and its cache have been found lying at the bottom of a number of devilish failures, and this bothers Vers. It does not matter that the IP is a much more complex piece of hardware than many others in Eagle, nor that when he helped to design it, Vers was truly a novice and pressed for time. Like everyone else in the group, he feels what Halberger calls the peer pressure, which leads to an absolute determination not to be the one who fails. Under the circumstances, it is annoying to have the IP blamed every time something goes wrong. Vers helped to design this piece of the computer. It is, as he says, part of him now, and he doesn't like to see it get picked on unfairly. For all of their similarities, though, Geyer and Vers like and appreciate each other, and when alone, each will brag about the other's skill. And for short stretches, they can in fact work together. They are doing so now. The second shift is just coming in. They're in that transitional period when the first shift, hot on the trail of the problem and reluctant to leave it, and the second shift, eager to get into the case, mingle and work together for a time. Halberger and Vers brief Geyer on the problem. They tell him that at the point of failure, the iCache contains the wrong instruction at the right address. There are, they figure, two possible culprits, the IP or else the system cache. Laughing about it, the three decide to interrogate the system cache first. Early in the debugging, someone wrote in the logbook that the system cache was working perfectly. Since then, when others have blamed failures on this board, Mike Ziegler, the man who designed it, has retorted by quoting that line. "The system cache is working perfectly. It was just a matter of degree after that," says Halberger, who once made the same claim for the IP. "How perfect was the system cache? Occasionally, we had to make it more perfect." This is, of course, just another friendly way to compete. Prove that the problem lies on a board that someone else designed. Although Geyer designed neither the system cache nor the IP, he, too, has a small incentive to hope that this problem lies with the system cache. He has, he says, been beaten pretty hard on the IP lately. He knows that Vers feels annoyed with him, so for once, Geyer doesn't even suggest that they disable the iCache. Instead, by common consent, they start hooking their probes to the system cache. They look at a few pictures but receive no immediate enlightenment. Tired out now, after more than 10 hours in the lab, Halberger and Vers depart and Geyer is left alone with Gollum. He spends the night with it. It is very late. As usual, Geyer is surrounded by logic analyzers and he is peering at their screens, when suddenly he touches his mouth, wheels around and starts flipping through one of the big books on the table. "A flash," he says. The diagnostic programmer, in writing Eclipse 21, has assigned data and instructions to specific mailboxes in the computer's memory system. From time to time, however, the programmer has switched the game and has written what is known as dirty code. What this means is that the program sometimes changes the contents of a mailbox. It moves an instruction, some data or both from one mailbox to another. Geyer has been studying addresses. When the machine fails, the target instruction, the one it's supposed to execute, is supposed to be in the mailbox with the address 21,766. Earlier on, somewhere back in the diagnostic program, Gollum successfully performs the same series of operations that it later fails to execute. And what is interesting is that, when it does these operations correctly, the target instruction is actually located at mailbox number 21,765. This is Geyer's flash. He takes up the huge, bound logbook and records a hypothesis. The following is a rough translation. The diagnostic program originally puts the target instruction at address 21,765. And then, sometime later on, it moves the target instruction to 21,766. But the IP never gets word of the change, though the system cache does. Now, sometime after the target instruction is switched from mailbox 21,765 to 21,766, the program directs Gollum to execute the instruction at 21,766. The IP receives this command and looks through its cache. It says to itself, in effect, mailbox 21,766? I've got that address and there's an instruction in it. Let's run it. But in the iCache, the target instruction is still at 21,765, and mailbox number 21,766 contains an error message. In short, the iCache contains an outdated piece of memory. Why didn't it get updated along with the other parts of the memory system? Maybe, Geyer writes, the system cache is to blame. The system cache is supposed to know exactly what is in the iCache. If an instruction or data gets moved to a new address, the system cache is supposed to tell the IP to throw away the outdated mailbox and get the new one, the one with the target instruction in it. Somewhere back in the program, Geyer figures, the system cache lost track of what was in the iCache. It forgot that the IP had the target instruction in mailbox 21,765. And so, when the change was made in the location of the target instruction, it never told the IP to get rid of the old, outdated mailbox. Geyer likes this hypothesis. He records it with mounting enthusiasm, and describing it later, he repossesses the feeling, speaking rapidly, gesturing with both hands. Then he stops, puts his hands on the table, and says, "Of course, it was completely wrong." It's very late now, past midnight. Geyer has an analyzer hooked up to the bus, a transmission line, as it were, that carries signals to and from the memory system. He is tracking, somewhat at random, farther and farther back through the diagnostic program, taking pictures of addresses that get generated. Just before he knocks off, he comes across another occasion in which Gollum performs the JSR and return and hits the target instruction successfully. In this instance, the target instruction is residing at mailbox number 21,772, in the same block of addresses as it is located later on in the program when the computer fails. Now Geyer knows that in the course of this long diagnostic program, Gollum is being sent to the same general area of memory, many times, to find the target instruction. There's no flash this time, though. Geyer feels sort of neutral. It's beginning to look more complex, he is thinking on his way out of the lab. Vers arrives around dawn. He has made this a habit ever since he started to get the hang of debugging. Coming early these days assures him of several hours alone with Gollum. In the back of Vers' mind still lies a small suspicion that the problem might after all be noise. And now, much to Geyer's delight, when he finds out later on, it is Vers himself who disconnects the iCache. Then he runs the program past the point of failure, and everything works. He puts the iCache back in, and once again Gollum fails. This doesn't prove that the IP is to blame, but it does tend to eliminate noise as a suspect, once and for all, because noise tends to cause failures unpredictably, with no discernible pattern. Vers turns to the logbook and Geyer's notes. Geyer's made some progress. He's proven that the program directs Gollum to the particular target instruction on a number of occasions. He's shown that the program changes the address of this target instruction many times, and also that the program is switching the contents of mailboxes in one fairly small region of memory. It looks to Vers like one of those problems that involves a time bomb, and one way to tackle that sort of crock is to follow the clues back to the culprit. Vers sets out methodically. First, he finds out exactly where in the program the failure occurs. It's on the fourth pass, at the 158th iteration of the subtest that contains the misaddressed target instruction. Next, Vers examines addresses rather different from the ones Geyer sampled. These addresses are called tags. The mailboxes in the machine's memory system are organized in neighborhoods called blocks. Each block contains 256 mailboxes. Like each mailbox, each block has a unique address, which is a number. This number is the tag. Vers sees in his analyzer that at the moment when the machine fails, the tag of the block of mailboxes in the iCache is 21. But the tag for what should be the corresponding block in the system cache is 45. The two tags should be the same. Vers goes searching to find out which one is right. The answer should reveal whether the culprit is the system cache or the IP. Holberger has arrived by this time and has pulled up a chair. Vers, meantime, has set up the equipment for his search. He's hooked up a couple of logic analyzers in such a way that they will record the tag numbers in the system cache and IP, both at the time of failure and in each of 256 previous ticks of the computer's clock. He's run the program all over again, up to the point of the failure, and now he's looking back at one picture after another. This promises to be a long and tedious morning at Gollum. Holberger retreats to work with Dave Epstein at Coke. Nothing turns up. By the time Geyer comes in, Vers hasn't found a single new clue. Holberger holds a short conference. "We need new ideas. We're gonna defer it." The micro kids have just delivered a new batch of rewritten microcode, and Geyer agrees to work on testing that for the evening. Vers goes home, with the two tag numbers, the 45 and the 21, rolling around in his mind. Which one is right? It's a simple enough question, and obviously there's an answer. It's just a matter of finding a way to get it. "I think that in the lab Vers is the best of the college kids," Rayzala says. "The reason I say that, he's driven to solving a problem. His whole chemistry, his whole environment is that he'll just go after it and after it. His attitude is that if he can't get time alone on the machine to work on a problem, he'll come in at 4 in the morning. So he can do it his own way, and his own way is often right. Vers himself feels that by the time debugging begins, designs should be more nearly perfect than this one was. A bug in the logic of a design, though discovered and fixed in the lab, stands as a slight reproach to the designer. Not that Vers doesn't enjoy debugging. He just doesn't like mistakes. And as Rayzala has noticed, he doesn't just work casually to find and fix a mistake, he attacks. So it's up early the next morning for Vers. He doesn't want any interference. He wants time alone with this bug. To Vers, debugging the machine, particularly the IP, the part that he helped to design, has become a very personal thing. A computer to people who designed it, it's part of them. You can almost feel what's wrong with it. This problem feels like a time bomb, but how to find it? "I get quite a lot of work done in the morning while taking a shower," says Vers. "Showers are kinda boring things, all things considered." Now in the shower, before leaving for work, he conceives a new approach. Yesterday, he tried to find out whether 21 or 45 was the correct tag by looking back from the point of failure. Evidently, though, the answer lies farther back than an analyzer can look. So why not start searching from the other direction, forward instead of backward? He's done something like this before, on a similar problem. He'll run the program up to the fourth pass, and then every time Gollum performs the JSR and return, he'll have the machine stop so he can get a picture with the analyzer and a printout on the system console. It'll take a while to go through the program that way. It'll be like searching every luggage locker at Kennedy Airport. It's a good thing he's up early, because Holberger might not stand for this. It's not the most elegant approach, but sometimes there is no elegant approach. He's willing to try this, he's decided by the time he gets to the lab. A few hours later, Holberger drives into Westboro. The sun is in his eyes this morning, and he wonders in a detached sort of way where it will be hitting his windshield when they finish this job. Debugging Eagle has the feel of a career in itself. Holberger isn't thinking about any one problem, but about all the various problems at once as he walks into the lab. What greets him there surprises him. He shows it by smiling wryly. A great heap of paper lies on the floor, a continuous sheet of computer paper streaming out of the carriage at Gollum's system console. Stretched out, the sheet would run across the room and back again several times. You could fit a fairly detailed description of American history from the Civil War to the present on it. Vers sits in this midst of this chaos, the picture of the scholar. He's examined it all. He turns to Holberger. "I found it," he says. At the 122nd iteration of the subtest in question, the iCache contains the block of instructions with tag number 21. Millions of ticks of the computer's clock, and thousands of instructions later, at iteration 151 of the subtest, Vers has observed the system cache instructing the IP to replace tag number 21 with tag number 45. The system cache has proved its innocence. The IP, by inference, must have disobeyed the order. At iteration 158, the iCache is caught in the act of still harboring tag number 21, which I'm very sorry to say is wrong, Vers says. The IP, his board, is the villain. Some problems are easy to find and hard to fix. Some are hard to find and easy to fix. Some go both ways. They have seen and will continue to encounter permutations of all three. This one was hard to find. It happens to be easy, almost trivial to repair. Now Holberger and Vers know where the failure occurs. They move fast. Seen working at such a moment, they might remind you of a couple of airline pilots in the cockpit of their big jet, preparing for takeoff. Heroes of technique flicking switches with both hands, reading dials, and talking to the tower all at once. Vers and Holberger play the program up to iteration 151, the place where the time bomb gets set, where the system cache tells the IP to get rid of the invalidated block of instructions and to bring in tag 45. They hook up analyzers and look at a number of different kinds of pictures. When, in fairly short order, the crucial picture appears on the screen of one of the analyzers, they don't need to perform any exegesis at all. There it is, yup. They see the IP throwing out tag number 45 and keeping the old, invalid tag 21. A few more pictures show that the IP is, quite literally, getting its signals crossed. The IP gets from the system cache the signal to throw away tag 21. But before it can obey, the signal from the system cache gets changed by another signal coming from another part of the machine. The solution lies in delaying the arrival of that second signal, so that the IP will always have time to clear out an old block before it's asked to do something else. The solution takes the material form of a circuit called a NAND gate, which reproduces the knot and function of Boolean algebra. The part costs 8 cents wholesale. The NAND gate produces a signal. Writing up the eco, Holberger christens this signal "Not Yet." He's very pleased with the name. Schematics he's seen from other companies use formal, technical names for signals. The Eclipse group, by contrast, looks for something simple that fits, and if they can't come up with something appropriate, they're apt to use their own names. "Not Yet" perfectly describes what this signal does. That's the Eclipse group's way, Holberger notes. It's the general approach that West has in mind when he says, "No muss, no fuss." It's also a way, a small one to be sure, of leaving something of yourself inside your creations. This is fun. They install the NAND gate that produces the not yet signal, and Holberger writes in the logbook, "With this eco installed, Eclipse 21 runs 10 passes. Just one more routine chore remains. They have to make certain that this change doesn't foul up something else in the machine. So they start rerunning all the other various diagnostic programs that Gollum has already passed, and everything is proceeding nicely, when all of a sudden the console starts scratching out a message. One of the other diagnostic programs has produced a failure. "Oh no. We didn't do it," says Holberger. "We didn't do it right." He and Vers go to lunch. Holberger feels ill and picks at his food. When they return, they hook up a trace on the new failure, but without much enthusiasm. They take some pictures. It looks as if something complex is going wrong, but they can't immediately tell what, and they don't feel like opening up another long search right away. In part, their feeling stems from weariness. But there must also be something instinctive about their reluctance to dig into the new problem. For it seems they've forgotten to do something basic, and in a moment, Vers remembers. Vers takes out the NAND gate. He runs the failing program. The machine still commits the new failure, so it's not the NAND gate that did it. Greatly relieved, smiling now, Hulberger points out that they have the IP board out on the extender. The board is hooked up to Golem, but it's sitting in a small frame of its own, outside of the main frame of the machine. This is standard debugging practice, but boards aren't made with extenders in mind, and in some cases a perfectly good board won't work while out on an extender. With nimble fingers, they put the IP back in its proper place among the other boards, and the failure no longer occurs. Now Golem successfully negotiates all of the basic Eclipse diagnostics, including Eclipse 21. They've reached a milestone, but one that they thought they had reached before. There's no celebration, no sitting around Golem with their feet up on analyzers, savoring the victory, rehearsing the battle. Plenty of diagnostics stand before them, much trickier ones, in fact. A feeling of accomplishment is what Vers says he has. But then again, there's lots more feeling of accomplishment to go.